Now this would be an interesting exam work for someone, to actually analyze records for this and see if there is a difference. In my own records I see a difference because I write the findings and what the patient says while he's speaking. I write it while he's speaking. And I get these funny entries. He's saying, this happened and this happened and this happened. Then you have a conclusion having nothing to do with the rest. I don't change that. I let it stay there and people read this and this is a strange person. But that's what they said. I had a patient not long ago that came and she had a woman around 35, pain here, pain there, blue spot, reading in the records, there's pain everywhere, the fibromyalgia kind of person who has pain everywhere. And then it says, and then I can do this, she says. And she bends her finger back here. I don't know what that is, but somehow in my head a bell rings like, there's something weird. Yeah, my grandmother also had it, and my son. Yeah, you always know where this is going. And we're all tall and thin, and so forth. I look in the record and say, and you never told it? I say this every damn time I'm here. Nobody ever listens. Right? So I go through the record, it's never mentioned. And she's been going to this place for 10 years. Her grandmother went there, her son goes there, nobody ever mentioned because nobody has an explanation. Turns out it was Ehlers-Danlos. Right? It's a congenital syndrome of the connective tissues. Anyway, which I wouldn't have known unless I'd had Google and I did, ecchymosis, which is the blue spots, and hyperextensibility and whatever, and up it comes with Ehlers-Danlos. And I said, I've heard of that. So in another era, I wouldn't have found it either. But the interesting thing is that nobody mentioned it, because if they had mentioned it, they would have made themselves guilty of not trying to find out. Yeah, she has something like this, but you know what? It's soon lunchtime. They can't write that. So they drop the finding. So what would the computer have found? Nothing. There's nothing there. They wouldn't have found the diagnosis because the symptoms weren't there. So the only way to have a medical record with clinical findings that the computer can analyze and discover something you didn't already know, that is either to have anyone watching Star Trek here? The tricorder. You know the tricorder? This little thing. Right? And all the vital data come up. If you had that, you could connect it to a machine telling you, oh, that's what's wrong with it. Yeah? And you don't need a doctor anymore, but it doesn't exist. And the second thing is to train a whole, they had almost that in China, the barefoot doctors. Yeah? But it's not that anyway. But you had to train a new generation of doctors that know every clinical examination, everything you can push and prod on a person, without understanding anything of it. So every patient that comes in goes to this doctor who starts pulling your arms and your legs and poking every hole you have, for hours on end, entering everything into a machine without understanding anything. And the machine then tells him, it's the postman, or something. But that doesn't exist either. So the whole idea is defective. So if the computer is correctly programmed, it will never draw a valid conclusion. It can't do it. Increased communication between systems is another argument. But there's no point in that, because if you send an electronic record from one system to the other and it says cardiac examination here and it says heart there, and the system say, those are the two same things, so what? Because if this record is sent through and I read cardiac sounds here, I have no problem understanding this. And we already decided that the computer can do nothing with the information. There is no point in making these two expressions equivalent. Just pass me the text, right? Unless we have the tricorder, but that's very far away. I think I murdered that one thoroughly, didn't I? We got one. Forcing doctors to express themselves with less ambiguity. That's a very popular argument too, because if you read medical records now, you see, well, he has kind of this and kind of that, and you say they never make up their minds about anything. And with strict terminology, you know, it would be clear, does he or does he not have a myocardial infarction? And that is seen as something good, because then they can count on it, they can analyze it, they can make statistics out of it and everything. But the problem here is not that the doctors lack words, because nobody has as many words as a doctor. They can talk forever. But the problem is that if a doctor expresses himself unclearly, it's because he thinks unclearly. It's not because he can't express himself. It's because he has nothing to say. If you force him to say, do you hear this murmur on the right or the left side? And he says, well, it's sort of rightish. Eh? And you force him to choose, he's going to say, okay, right. If you force me, right. And then everybody says, yeah, but all these people have sounds on the right side. There must be something wrong in the ear. No, it's because you forced me to choose. Normal language has a fantastic ability to convey not only what you're saying, but how sure you are or unsure you are of what you're saying. Eh? So you say, it's mostly right. That expresses exactly what I want to say. I think it's the right side, but, you know, if you find an argument that it isn't, well, okay, I'm open for discussion. Eh? You force a terminology on this person. You say, decide, right or not. You can't, because if you're honest, you would say, I'm not going to answer the question. Then you lose the data completely. Eh? If you're dishonest, you're going to say right or whatever, and the next patient I say left, so they don't think I always say right. Eh? So what you do, you destroy the data. And I was reading this Black Swan. Anyone read the Black Swan? Mm-hmm. There's one part where he says, don't ever cross a river which is on average 4 feet deep. Because on average can mean anything. I mean, you're probably going to drown, right? The uncertainty in the measurement is vital when you cross that river. Is it 4 feet plus minus half a foot? You're going to survive. Is it 4 feet plus minus or plus 20 feet? You're going to die. The same thing with medical data. I say he has a thoracic pain, possibly distributed over the left arm. That's exactly what I want to say. While in SNOMED you have to say it's left-sided or right-sided, and it's pain or it's not pain, or it's pain of that degree. I don't want to say that. Don't force me. You could modify SNOMED to have that inserted and incorporated, but if you need 28 slides for the murmur at the heart now, what will it be when you want to express exactly how uncertain you are over what you just said? Eh? So it's meaningless. The best you can achieve is to, if you get the terminology just right, you will express the same uncertainty that you can now do in one sentence, with the terminology that nobody will be able to handle. So you can't force more accuracy in the records than you already have, because nobody has that accuracy. And then they say, and the final thing is, and I've actually seen this several times publicly said, doctors use too many synonyms. Pulmonary infection, pneumonia, airway infection, whatever, and they say, this has to end. Why? Because computers have such a terrible problem with multiple words meaning the same thing. I thought we invented machines for that, but okay. So instead of programming this machine to equate 5 different terms with one, think, no, it's much easier if we don't have to do that. We're going to retrain 30,000 doctors to speak differently. It's somewhat a loss of proportion here. I mean, program the damn machine to do it, right? Then they say, no, we can't do that because actually these terms don't mean exactly the same thing. Yes, but then you're back at, why do you want to equate them? You can't. So what they want to say is they don't mean the same thing. What we want to do is train the doctors to actually mean the same thing when they talk. But they mean different things because they are different things. Then we're back in the flow diagram. You remember that? Reality must fit our model, else we can't count the money. Okay, I don't think I'm finished with that part. Anybody else?
What about the exchange of information between different regions and different systems when you're not having a specific standard?
Well, the first question is, what about the exchange of information between different regions if you don't have the same standard? Which my counter question would be, which information does need the same standard? Text. Because there's nobody else to read it except the human. Why not just pass text? I mean, a fax message is just as good, if not better, because I don't have to log in. Give me a real life no, because give me a real example of a piece of information which will have more value if it's recognized as a particular kind than not. Give me any advantage of a structured information over just plain text, and I would agree, but I can't find one. Sad but true. Plain text beats the hell out of most of this. Even lab results. If you look at lab results, you say, yeah, but the lab result here, hemoglobin here must be the same as there. You have a problem because, first of all, it doesn't matter. If I see HB here and I see SHB here, I know when I read it, it's the same thing, right? When I see HB here and HB here, they're the same, and you put them next to each other, I know that I still can't say that they are the same. Why? Because they're two different labs, and maybe their normal values are a little bit different, right? So even if they are equated, doesn't mean that I accept them as equal value. Then they say, yes, but we can't draw a graph. And you see all these graph of HB and blood pressures and everything, and they sell like crazy because they have graphs. Nobody needs graphs. I'm sorry, except intensive care and operating theaters. Of all these systems with blood pressure graphs, have you ever used them? It's pointless. It's not worth the pixels they're drawn on.
And you don't have time to see pictures.
What?
You don't have time to see pictures, you have to concentrate on the patient.
Yeah, right. And it doesn't tell you anything, really, because you don't look at these. You look at it if you have a 24-hour registration of blood pressure every 5 minutes, which happens. It's interesting with graph. You get that from that machine. It has no place in the records. That's a specific graph. That's good. In intensive care, yes. Anesthesia, yes. Operation theater, yes. But not in the general record. A diagram over the graph over his hemoglobin value over the last 3 years. It's ridiculous. It doesn't tell you anything. I want to know what it's today and what it was last time. It's going up or down. Having a graph over 3 years is useless. And even then, if you have common systems like today, even within the system here in Stockholm or in Uppsala, if you have hemoglobins from the same lab with a month's difference, and the lab changed their machine, you all of a sudden get them as different values below each other. So even when they are in the same system, they don't get them. You actually have to, yeah, right, there are 2 lines. I don't care. That makes no difference. So even though it sounds good, I can find no example of when it's useful for communicating system to agree on terminology, otherwise than addressing, like that hospital, I find it there, and so forth. But the content, no. There is actually none. Surprisingly, none that I can think of. Images, yeah, it's easier if you can run DICOM, but that's not a problem. What we would need, however, is camera images that nobody does. They used to do it 10 years ago. They don't anymore. I mean, if I take a picture of a wound of a patient, I can send that to a specialist and he looks at that picture. That would be worth much money. Nobody does that. Why? I don't know.